The man in the gray janitor's uniform did not break stride. His steps were even and unhurried as he crossed the shimmering heat haze of the tarmac, a ghost moving through a world of frantic energy. Before him, the Strato 750 sat inert and silent, a monument to a $10 million failure. Around it, a constellation of engineers and executives buzzed with impotent fury. At the center of it all stood Catherine Sterling. Her arms were crossed, her posture a rigid line of command against the sweeping curve of the jet's fuselage. She saw the janitor approaching, and her eyes narrowed, not with anger, but with a flicker of curiosity. Another problem to be managed. "Sir, you cannot be here. This is a restricted area." The voice belonged to Marcus Thorne, her VP of Aviation Operations. He moved to intercept, his expensive suit a dark slash against the bright concrete. His tone was laced with the condescending authority he used like a cudgel. The janitor did not look at him. His gaze was fixed on a point near the wing root, a place no one had paid any mind for 3 agonizing weeks. He stopped at the edge of the velvet rope cordon, his presence a quiet question in the loud afternoon. "Get him out of here," Thorne snapped to a security guard. But Catherine raised a hand. "Wait!" Something in the man's focus held her. It was not the gawking of a starstruck employee, it was the appraisal of a craftsman. The man, Elias Vance, looked at her then. His eyes were clear and direct, holding no trace of fear or apology. He said nothing. He simply pointed a finger toward the aircraft. It was a gesture of such simple, unadorned confidence that it silenced the murmurings of the crowd. Thorne scoffed. "What, you have a theory? Does your mop have a diagnostic function?" Elias ignored him. His eyes were on Catherine. He lifted the rope and stepped under it. The security guard moved forward, but a sharp glance from Catherine froze him in place. Elias walked to the side of the jet, knelt, and ran his hand along a seam just below the wing. His fingers, clean but calloused, found a small, flush-mounted panel, no larger than a deck of cards. It was secured by 2 flathead screws, their slots caked with grime and oxidized paint. He looked up at the nearest engineer. "Screwdriver, flathead." The engineer, a man with a doctorate and a 6-figure salary, stared back, dumbfounded. Thorne stepped forward, his face mottled with rage. "This is absurd. Catherine, this is a circus. We have the best minds from 3 continents here." "Get him the screwdriver," Catherine said, her voice dangerously quiet. An assistant scrambled to a tool cart and returned, holding the tool out as if it were a venomous snake. Elias took it. He meticulously cleaned the grit from the screw slots with a thumbnail before inserting the blade. The screws resisted, sealed by years of weather and neglect. He adjusted his grip, applied steady, patient pressure, and turned. A faint screech of metal, and the first screw broke free. He repeated the process with the second. Section. He set the screws and the small panel carefully on the tarmac. Inside was a small cavity, a nest of bundled wires, and a single gray blockish component. It was a relay switch. A thick patina of greenish-white corrosion covered its primary terminal. Elias looked into the cockpit, made eye contact with the pilot, and held up a single finger. 1 moment. He reached into the cavity with his thumb and forefinger. He did not pull or twist. He simply tapped the corroded terminal. A firm, precise tap. There was a faint crackle. A tiny blue spark, almost invisible in the daylight, jumped from the terminal to its housing. From deep within the port engine, a fuel pump whined to life. A low hum followed, escalating in pitch. The massive fan blades at the front of the nacelle began to turn, slowly at first, then faster. The hum became a roar, a wave of sound that washed over the tarmac and vibrated in the bones of everyone present. The Stratus 750, dead for 21 days, was alive. Marcus Thorne stood frozen, his mouth slightly agape. The crowd of engineers stared in disbelief. Catherine Sterling's expression was unreadable, a mask of stone. She looked from the roaring engine back to the janitor, who was now calmly replacing the panel, his movements as methodical as they had been moments before. He finished, stood up, and handed the screwdriver back to the stunned assistant. He looked at no one. He simply turned and began walking back the way he came, his job done. If you have ever poured your soul into your work only to be erased, if you have ever been judged by the uniform you wear instead of the knowledge you carry, if you believe that true competence is quiet and integrity has a price that can't be paid in dollars, then stay with this one until the end. 3 weeks earlier, the world had been a simpler, more orderly place for Elias Vance. His universe was a small 2-bedroom house on a quiet street, and the steady, predictable rhythm of raising a daughter. His life was a structure he had built with his own hands, like the intricate wooden clock that ticked on his mantelpiece. Each gear was cut and sanded by him, each movement a testament to precision and patience. His daughter, Lily, was the mainspring of it all. At 10 years old, she had his observant eyes and a mind that loved to understand how things fit together. Their evenings were spent at the large oak table in his workshop, him cleaning and calibrating a vintage carburetor, her assembling a complex model of the solar system. The air smelled of sawdust, oil, and the faint, clean scent of the glue she used. "Dad," she had said one night, holding up a tiny plastic Saturn, "if the rings are just ice and rock, why don't they just fall into the planet? Or fly away?" Elias stopped his work, wiping his hands on a clean rag. He did not give her the simple answer. He took a piece of paper and drew a diagram, explaining the balance between gravitational pull and orbital velocity. He spoke of it like a perfectly balanced engine, forces in harmony, a system designed to endure. She listened, rapt, understanding not just the answer, but the principle behind it. This was his purpose: to build, to explain, to ensure things worked as they should. The janitor job at Sterling Aviation's private airfield was another gear in his carefully constructed life. It was not a career, it was a function. The hours were fixed, the duties clear. He started at 2 in the afternoon and finished at 10 at night, which meant he was always there to make Lily breakfast and see her off to school. The pay was enough. It kept their house, their workshop, and their quiet life intact. No one at the airfield knew who he was or who he had been. To them, he was just Elias, the quiet man who cleaned the offices and the hangar. He never spoke of his past. He never mentioned the name Vance Aeronautical, the company he had co-founded. He never talked about the Vance cycle engine, an engine that had redefined fuel efficiency in its class, an engine whose patent still bore his signature. He certainly never spoke of the divorce that had stripped it all away, a legal engine of destruction that had left him with nothing but his tools, his integrity, and his daughter. The past was a locked room, and he had no desire to open the door. He first saw the jet when it was towed into the main hangar. It was a Strato 750, a beautiful machine, sleek and powerful. But it was being moved with the apologetic slowness reserved for broken things. He recognized the engine nacelles immediately. They were a modified version of his design, a later generation he had never worked on but knew intimately. It was like seeing a photograph of a relative he had never met. The next day, the team started to arrive. They were loud, confident men who wore expensive polo shirts with corporate logos. They talked in acronyms and carried laptops that ran complex simulations. Elias watched them from a distance as he swept the hangar floor. He saw them cluster around the port engine, their voices a mix of frustration and professional arrogance. Marcus Thorne was their conductor, orchestrating the performance of failure. Elias had seen Thorne before, striding through the facility like he owned it. He was a man who spoke of leveraging synergies and optimizing workflows, a man who managed perceptions, not machinery. "We've run the full FADEC diagnostic 3 times, one engineer said, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "The system shows no faults. The igniters are firing, fuel pressure is nominal, but we get no combustion. It's like the laws of physics have been suspended inside that turbine." "It's a ghost in the machine," another added, trying to sound poetic. Thorne nodded sagely. "It's a deep-level software corruption, probably from the last avionics update. I told Catherine we were pushing the integration too fast." He was already building the narrative, rearranging the furniture in the room to make himself look blameless. Elias paused his sweeping, leaning on his broom near a steel support column. He listened. Fuel, spark, and air. That was all it took. If the diagnostics said everything was present, then the diagnostics were missing something. Or they were asking the wrong questions. The system was reporting what it was designed to report, but the problem lay in a place the system could not see. It was a door left slightly open in a locked house. The sensors only confirmed the locks were engaged. That evening, at home, he pulled a dusty binder from the bottom of a bookshelf. VC3000 Engine, Core Design Principles and Schematics. His name was on the cover, Elias Vance, Lead Engineer. He opened it, the pages smelling of time and memory. He went to the section on the electrical system. He had designed it to be redundant, robust, with triple fail-safes. But he had also been forced to make compromises. The board had wanted it lighter. The manufacturing division had wanted it cheaper to assemble. He remembered one compromise in particular, a secondary power relay for the fuel pump controller. To save on the cost of a specialized waterproof harness, it had been placed in an area that was technically rated as a dry bay, but that he knew from airflow simulations could be subject to condensation under specific, rare atmospheric conditions. He had argued against it for weeks. He had written a memo. He had been overruled. The project manager, a man much like Marcus Thorne, had assured him the statistical probability was negligible. "Don't let perfect be the enemy of good, Elias," he had said. Elias traced the wiring diagram with his finger, his mind moving back 15 years. He had insisted on a manual override access point, a tiny external panel for field servicing. It was a concession they had granted him, a small victory in a losing battle. He had signed off on the final design, his signature a mark of reluctant acceptance, not proud ownership. He closed the binder. It was probably not that. 15 years of service, thousands of engines. The problem would have been discovered long ago. His was just one of many possibilities. He put the binder away and went to check on Lily. The next day, a new team arrived, this time from the engine manufacturer itself. They were even more confident, even more expensive. They repeated the same tests. They found the same results. Nothing. Catherine Sterling arrived on the third day. She did not stride like Thorne. She moved with a quiet intensity that drew all focus to her. She listened to the engineers, her expression betraying nothing. Elias watched as Thorne gave her the update, his words a smooth, polished surface over a void of incompetence. "We're looking at a complete digital teardown, Catherine," Thorne said. "We'll have to wipe the FADEC and reinstall the base code. It's a 10-day process, minimum. We suspect a latent bug in the code, something no one could have foreseen." Catherine looked at the silent engine. "A bug that only affects one of the two identical engines on my $50 million jet." "It's possible. An anomaly. These systems are complex," Thorne said smoothly. Elias was cleaning the windows of a small observation office overlooking the hangar floor. He saw the flicker of doubt in Catherine's eyes. She was a CEO, insulated by layers of management, but she was not a fool. She knew the smell of a lie, even a well-dressed one. She was beginning to realize that the men she paid to give her answers were only giving her excuses. He saw her gaze drift across the hangar, past the huddle of experts, past the gleaming jet, and for a moment it rested on him. He was just a man with a squeegee, a part of the background. He met her gaze for a second before turning back to his work, leaving a perfect streak-free pane of glass in his wake. The days bled into a week, then two. The mood in the hangar grew sour. The initial excitement of tackling a unique problem curdled into the grim reality of failure. Tempers frayed. The engineers began to bicker, protecting their professional reputations. Thorne spent more time on his phone, managing the fallout, spinning the story for the board and the press. The jet became his albatross. Elias continued his routine. He swept the floors. He emptied the trash cans, which were filled with printouts of diagnostic logs and empty coffee cups. He cleaned the offices, and he watched. He saw the small things. An engineer kicking the tire of a tool cart in frustration. A junior mechanic looking at a wiring diagram with a completely lost expression. He saw the patterns of their failure. They were all looking at the problem through the lens of a computer screen. No one was looking at the machine itself. His friend Ben, another man from the cleaning crew, shook his head one afternoon as they stood together by the loading bay doors. "Whole lot of fancy degrees out there, and they can't start a lawnmower," Ben said, gesturing with his chin toward the hangar. "Waste of money, if you ask me." "They're looking in the wrong place," Elias said, his voice soft. Ben looked at him, surprised. Elias rarely offered an opinion. "Yeah? Where should they be looking?" Elias considered the question. Explaining the potential for galvanic corrosion on a tertiary relay due to a 15-year-old design compromise was not a conversation for the loading bay. "Somewhere simple," he said finally. "It's always somewhere simple." He noticed a new pattern emerging. A small, portable diagnostic kit was often left unattended near the jet's landing gear. The engineers, in their arrogance, considered the area secure. One afternoon, while the senior team was in a heated meeting with Thorne, Elias walked past the kit. He stopped, knelt as if to tie his shoe, and his eyes scanned the screen. It was running a real-time monitor of the engine's electrical bus. He saw a stream of data scrolling past. Nominal voltage, standby power active, sensor checks positive. And then he saw it. A tiny flicker. A micro-fluctuation in the voltage feed to the fuel pump controller. It was a drop of less than 1/10 of a volt, lasting only a few milliseconds. On the graph, it was a stray pixel, a piece of digital noise. The diagnostic software, programmed to look for significant drops or outright failures, would have automatically disregarded it as a statistical anomaly. But Elias knew it was not noise. It was a signal. It was the whisper of a failing connection, a cry for help that no one else could hear. It was the relay. He was almost sure of it now. The corrosion was creating just enough resistance to cause that minuscule voltage drop. Not enough to trigger a fault code, but just enough to prevent the fuel controller's final activation sequence from engaging. The system reported it was ready, but it could never take that final step. He stood up and walked away. The knowledge sat inside him, a heavy, solid thing. He now had a choice. He could say nothing. He could let them continue to fail, let them eventually give up and replace the entire engine at a cost of millions. It was not his problem. His job was to sweep the floors. Or he could intervene. He could walk up to Marcus Thorne and tell him that his teams of experts were fools. He could explain that the answer was not in their software, but in a $50 part that a janitor had identified by looking at a graph for 3 seconds. He knew how that would go. He would be dismissed, ridiculed, and likely fired for his presumption. It was a lose-lose proposition. Water closing over a stone. The decision was made for him the next day. Thorne, his career now hanging by the thread of the grounded jet, was becoming paranoid. He needed a scapegoat, a distraction. He saw Elias near the hangar, talking to Ben. He saw the way Elias's eyes would track the work being done on the jet. He mistook quiet observation for subversive intent. Later that afternoon, Thorne called security. He strode out onto the hangar floor, pointing dramatically at a high-end torque wrench lying on the floor a few feet from where Elias was working. "That wrench was in a locked cabinet," Thorne announced, his voice ringing with manufactured outrage. "This area is supposed to be secure. You," he said, pointing at Elias. "What were you doing over here?" "My job," Elias said calmly. "I was emptying the trash." "Did you touch that tool?" "No. It's company policy. No unauthorized personnel in the active work zone. And I've seen you, lurking around, watching my teams. It's suspicious." Thorne was playing to the audience of engineers and staff. He was reasserting his authority. "I can't have this kind of security risk. You're a liability." He turned to the head of security. "He's terminated, effective immediately. Escort him from the premises." Elias did not argue. He did not protest his innocence. He simply looked at Thorne, and in his quiet gaze, Thorne saw not fear or anger, but a profound and unsettling pity. It unnerved him more than any outburst would have. Elias set his cart of cleaning supplies neatly against a wall, turned, and walked toward the exit, the security guard trailing behind him like an afterthought. The news of the janitor's firing reached Catherine Sterling within the hour. Her assistant delivered it as a minor logistical update. Mr. Thorne terminated a member of the janitorial staff for a security breach in the hangar, the assistant reported dutifully. Catherine paused from reading a report filled with Thorne's elegant excuses. A security breach. It sounded important, but a janitor? It felt wrong. Disproportionate. It was the action of a man who was flailing, a man more interested in creating a show of control than in actually solving the problem. It was the final piece of data she needed. Thorne was not just incompetent, he was a liability. A thought sparked in her mind, the memory of a fleeting moment of eye contact across a hangar. The janitor, the man with the quiet, appraising eyes. On an impulse that she would later define as the turning point of her career, she spoke to her assistant. "Get me the personnel file for the janitor who was just fired, and bring me the original design archives for the Strato 750's engines, all of them." Her assistant looked confused but complied. An hour later, 2 files sat on her desk. One was a thin folder containing the employment application and records for one Elias Vance, single father. Address on the other side of town. No prior aviation experience listed. A blank slate. The other was a heavy set of binders and digital archives. The engine model was the VC3000G7. She keyed the model number into her terminal. The VC stood for Vance Cycle, a revolutionary design from a boutique firm, Vance Aeronautical, that had been bought out by a larger conglomerate over a decade ago. She opened the primary design binder. On the title page, under a list of key personnel, was the name, Elias Vance, Lead Design Engineer. She read the name 3 times. She looked from the dusty 15-year-old engineering document to the freshly printed termination notice. The same name. It was impossible. A coincidence. She ran a background check. The social security numbers matched. It was not a coincidence. The man she had allowed Marcus Thorne to fire was not a janitor. He was the man who had designed the very engine Thorne was failing to fix. The irony was so staggering, it was almost comical. Water had not closed over the stone. The stone had been the foundation all along. That evening, Catherine drove her own car, a discreet black sedan, away from the world of corporate jets and into the quiet, tree-lined streets of a neighborhood she had never known existed. She found the house, a modest but impeccably maintained bungalow. A light was on in a detached garage behind the house. She walked up the driveway. Through the open garage door, she saw him. Elias Vance was standing at a workbench, his back to her. The space was not a garage. It was a sanctuary of mechanical order. Tools hung in perfect alignment on the walls. Schematics were laid out on a large table. In the center of the room, on a stand, was a partially assembled V8 engine block, gleaming and pristine. She knocked softly on the doorframe. Elias turned, his expression unreadable. He showed no surprise at seeing the CEO of Sterling Aviation standing in his workshop. He simply wiped his hands on a rag and waited. "Mr. Vance," she began, her voice feeling inadequate in the face of the quiet competence that filled the room. "I believe we have a great deal to discuss." He did not invite her in. He did not smile. He just nodded, a silent acknowledgement that the truth had finally found its way home. He told her about the relay. He did not embellish. He did not assign blame. He explained the design compromise, the potential for moisture ingress, the specific signature of the micro-voltage drop he had seen. He spoke of the engine as if it were a living thing, whose language he understood. Catherine listened, her initial shock giving way to a cold, clear anger. Not at Elias, but at her own ignorance. At the system she had allowed to fester under her command, a system that had buried its most valuable asset under a janitor's uniform. "Thorne fired you," she said. It was a statement of fact, but it hung in the air like an accusation. "He was under pressure," Elias replied, offering a grace Marcus Thorne did not deserve. "Tomorrow," Catherine said, her voice hard with new resolve, "I am calling a press conference. I am going to publicly announce that my jet is unfixable. I am going to offer $2 million to anyone who can prove me wrong." Elias looked at her, a flicker of something, perhaps amusement in his eyes. "Why?" "Because I need to expose the rot in my company, Mr. Vance. And I need to do it in a way that no one can ignore. I need a spectacle. And then, I need the man who designed the engine to walk out, in front of everyone, and fix it." She paused. "Will you be there?" Elias thought of Lily. He thought of his quiet life. This was the opposite of that. It was loud. It was public. But it was also about setting things right. It was about the integrity of a design, the principle of a thing working as it should. "I will," he said. The next day was a storm of media activity. Catherine Sterling's announcement of the $2 million bet was headline news in the business and aviation worlds. It was seen as an act of colossal arrogance or profound desperation. Marcus Thorne stood beside her at the press conference, his face a mask of strained support. He thought she had gone mad, but it was a madness that took the spotlight off his failure, so he played along. The challenge was set for 3 o'clock that afternoon, on the tarmac. A crowd gathered. Reporters, industry rivals, board members, and the same group of failed engineers all assembled to watch the show. The atmosphere was thick with schadenfreude. At 3 o'clock, Catherine stood before the silent jet, a microphone in her hand. "For 21 days, the greatest minds in aviation have tried to solve this puzzle," she said, her voice clear and strong. "They have all failed. I have wagered $2 million that no one can start this engine. Is there anyone here willing to take my bet?" Silence. The reporters scribbled in their notebooks. Thorne allowed himself a small, smug smile. The jet was dead. He knew it. And then a path cleared through the crowd. Elias Vance walked through it. He wore simple, clean work pants and a blue button-down shirt. He was not a janitor anymore, nor was he the ghost of a forgotten engineer. He was simply a man coming to do a job. Thorne's smile vanished, replaced by a look of utter confusion. "What is he doing here? I fired him. Security!" But Catherine's own security detail flanked Elias, parting the crowd for him. They walked past the stunned board members and the incredulous reporters. They walked past the engineers who had dismissed him as part of the background scenery. Elias did not look at any of them. He walked to the jet, just as he had in his mind 100 times. Just as he had in reality that one fateful day. He knelt. He took the screwdriver offered to him by Catherine's head of security. He opened the panel. He showed the corroded relay to the nearest news camera, letting the lens zoom in on the simple, ugly truth. Then he reached in, tapped the terminal, and the world was filled with the triumphant roar of his engine coming back to life. The downfall was immediate and brutal. As the engine's whine settled into a stable, powerful hum, all eyes turned to Marcus Thorne. His face was pale, his arrogance stripped away, leaving only the hollow man beneath. Catherine did not need to say a word. The roaring engine said it all. He was escorted from the tarmac, his career a smoldering wreck. In the days that followed, the story of Elias Vance became legend. The quiet janitor, the forgotten genius. He was deluged with offers from rival corporations, from news networks, from publishers. He ignored them all. The only meeting he took was with Catherine Sterling. They met not in a boardroom, but in the now quiet hangar, standing under the wing of the Stratos 750. "I want to offer you Thorne's old job," she said. "Vice President of Aviation Operations. Name your salary." Elias shook his head. "I'm not a manager, Miss Sterling. I'm an engineer." "Then what do you want?" she asked. She was prepared to give him anything. "I want to create a new department," he said. "The Technical Integrity Division. It won't manage people. It will audit machines. It will report directly to you, and only you. It will have the authority to ground any aircraft, stop any procedure, and question any report if the data doesn't match the reality. Its job is to find the simple truths that everyone else is overlooking." Catherine was taken aback. He was not asking for power or money. He was asking for a way to institutionalize his own integrity. He was asking to be the company's conscience. "And my salary," Elias continued, "is my current pay, indexed for inflation. But my hours are non-negotiable. I leave every day at 4:30. I have to be home to help my daughter with her homework." Catherine looked at the man before her, a man who had been handed the keys to the kingdom and was asking only for a small workshop within it. For the first time in a long time, she smiled, a genuine, unforced smile. "Deal," she said. 3 months later, the hangar was a different place. The culture of blame had been replaced by one of quiet accountability. The new Technical Integrity Division, led by Elias Vance, had become the most respected department in the company. Elias, in his simple work shirt, was a more commanding presence than Marcus Thorne had ever been in his tailored suits. One afternoon, Catherine found him not in his new, clean office, but standing on a maintenance ladder, his hands dirty, talking quietly with a young mechanic about the wear patterns on a turbine blade. He was not managing, he was teaching. He was ensuring things worked as they should. That evening, Elias Vance went home at exactly 4:30. He walked into his workshop, where Lily was waiting for him at the big oak table. She was working on a new project, a complex model of a jet engine. "Dad," she said, looking up, "I think I see a problem. This power relay here, if it gets wet, it could corrode, right?" Elias looked at the diagram, then at his daughter. He felt a wave of quiet satisfaction, a feeling more profound than any public vindication. He had set his own small corner of the world right, and now that integrity was being passed on. "You're right," he said, pulling up a stool beside her. "Let's see if we can design a better way."